Well done, wonderful. So this morning, you might have already gathered, but we want to talk all around, just let me get my clipboard. We want to talk all around taking on Jesus' yoke, giving him our burdens, and talking about why that is a tool to go. So, just let me find my words. The tool that we have in our passage for today is a yoke. A yoke. Now, when Jesus is speaking to the people, they would have understood what a yoke was, probably more than we do today, because they were used to it being used in the fields, in the places around them. And they were even used to this idea of a yoke being used as a metaphor, as a way of describing how they live their lives. Ben, can I just borrow you a moment? When Jesus says, "Take my yoke upon you," and sit down there. When Jesus said, "Take my yoke upon you," that's not what he meant. When Jesus said, "Take my yoke upon you," there's a picture going to come up. This is what he meant by a yoke. Can you see that? A yoke was a piece of wood used to go across the shoulder of an animal, and it would be used to help pull a plow or a cart. In other words, to carry a burden, to carry a heavy weight. Thank you very much. And what Jesus is saying in this passage is that people in the crowds that he was talking to, as he looked out, he saw they were really tired. He saw they were trying to live their lives as well as they could, but they were carrying all these things that were weighing them down, that were making them tired, that were stopping them from knowing his love, his peace, his joy, and his freedom. Jesus was speaking to the crowds, but I think Jesus speaks to us too. I'm assuming all of us want to live well. We want to be good and kind people. We want to make a difference in the world. We want to be loved, and we want to love God and others, and so we do our best to work hard, to pick up our yoke, if you like, and to get going. But sometimes we find things can be quite tough and heavy. We can get weighed down by different things. Joel, can I just borrow you again? There's no eggs involved. And Vix is just going to help with this as well. So I want you just to imagine that's your yoke. Okay, just hold on to it with your hands. Brilliant. And we're just going to add some things that people, you yourselves, might often be carrying around. You see, as we go through life, perhaps we see or hear the news of what's going on in the world, and so we get really worried. So we're going to put worry on there, and we're going to add it to here. Brilliant. Or perhaps you've fallen out with someone recently. Perhaps you've fallen out with someone at school or at work or in your family, and you're feeling really upset about it. And that, as we carry it around, can weigh us down as well. Or perhaps you've done something wrong, even this week, even this morning, but maybe there's some even bigger stuff that you still feel you've done wrong. The Bible calls it sin. Vicky calls it wrong things, but it amounts to the same thing. Or perhaps, because you're carrying that stuff around and that sin around, you just spend time feeling guilty. You just feel a bit guilty about stuff, or maybe a bit ashamed about stuff. And so we carry that stuff around as well. Or perhaps you're searching hard for God. Perhaps you're trying to find out more about God. Or perhaps you've been a Christian for years and you're just trying really hard to be a good Christian. As we talk about this series to go, you're trying really hard to go out there and share the love of Jesus. Perhaps you're trying really hard to find God or to live a life that pleases God, but it's really hard and heavy because it all feels a bit religious, a bit too much like religion. And so what happens is we carry all these things around with us. It's exhausting. We start off with good intentions, but then we get so tired so quickly that we can then feel rubbish, that we didn't do better, and so we try and work harder, but we get more weighed down and more weighed down and more weighed down. And that's why Jesus says, are you exhausted? Are you burned out on religion? Are you weary? And so what Jesus says in this passage is stop. Lay your burden down. Take off your yoke. Don't go anywhere. And instead, take up my yoke. Just put your hands on there. Instead, take up my yoke. Walk with me. Let me shoulder the weight. So I'm going to ask George just to come and play the part of Jesus. Jesus says, put that old yoke down, but take up my yoke. Notice Jesus doesn't say there's no yoke to carry. There's still a yoke. There's still plans and purposes for us to live out and carry out in this world. But Jesus says, take up my yoke. And often you see, we saw it on the picture, there'd be yokes that weren't just for one animal, but for two animals. And the point of that is they would be yoked together so that they could share the weight. So that the stronger animal could come alongside and help take the weight and walk with you as you set about the day's task. And so Jesus says, put down that yoke, walk with me, take up mine, let me shoulder the weight, let me carry the burden. Vicky, you're up again. And so whereas before we were carrying worry and it was weighing us down, Jesus says, instead of worrying, come to me, know that I've got this, and receive my peace. Yeah, that'd be lovely. Receive my peace. He says, instead of living in pain because relationships aren't right, come to me and know that I've got this and receive my healing. And so Jesus' yoke is one of peace and one of healing. He says, instead of living in sin or doing wrong things, come to me, I've got this, and instead receive my mercy and my grace. And so Jesus' yoke is one of peace, of healing, of grace, and of mercy. And then he says, instead of feeling guilty all the time, instead of living with shame, come to me, know that I've got this, and receive forgiveness. And so Jesus' yoke is one of healing, of peace, of grace, of mercy, and of forgiveness. Instead of striving to know me more, instead of striving to try and be a good Christian, instead of getting all religious about stuff, I came that you'd have relationship, not religion. So come to me, know that I've got this, and receive my love. And so Jesus' yoke is one of grace, mercy, peace, healing, love, forgiveness. And then he says, instead of feeling overwhelmed and busy the whole time, come to me, know that I've got this, and receive my joy. But rest would work. And so can you see the difference between the two yokes? Whereas before, often we go through life carrying all this heavy stuff in our own strength, by ourselves, trying to tough it out like we try to tough out the bags. Instead, Jesus says, lay that down. Let me take the yoke with me, for my yoke is light. It's full of healing and forgiveness and joy and peace and grace and mercy and all the other words you might want to add. Thank you very much, boys. There we are. And so Jesus says in this passage, the Message translation puts it like this: come away with me. Come away with me. So my question for you this morning is, how are you? How am I? How are we as a church taking time to respond to that invitation? How are you taking time to lay down your yoke and come to Jesus? For me, I'm about to go off for 3 months and take a time of sabbatical to spend some time doing just that. The word sabbatical, it's the same root as Sabbath. God rested on the seventh day. We see Jesus taking Sabbath, disappearing up into the mountains to just be alone with his Father, to get that right, to reframe what he's carrying that he doesn't need to, and what God can carry with him. And so for us, for you might not be able to take a 3-month sabbatical, but where are your Sabbath moments? Are you taking time each day? Are you taking a day each week? Are you taking a block of time maybe each year to rest, to come and learn the unforced rhythms of grace, to come again, lay your yoke down, recognizing what you're carrying, because often we don't, and instead taking on his yoke? Some of us are going to Focus in a few weeks' time. That's an opportunity. One person's really excited about it. That's an opportunity to rest as a family, to rediscover those rhythms of grace. But maybe you're taking some holiday this summer. Maybe you're finishing school and going off on holiday, and it's going to be fun and you can rest, but take some time to ask Jesus as well. Why is it a tool for go? Because Jesus lived this life of unforced rhythms of grace, and people flocked to him. And they flocked to him, it says earlier in this passage, because it meant they could know the Father. If you want to know what the Father's like, look at Jesus. And people were drawn to that. Not just because of Jesus' healing and his preaching and his miracles, although that had a big impact, but because they saw in Jesus something that was deeply attractive about the way to live your life. And so a yoke becomes a tool for us to go. Because actually, as we come to Jesus, as we come away with Jesus, we'll find that naturally, as we go, people will want to know more. So can I invite you to stand?